We want to welcome all of you. We want to welcome our friends joining us online. Always great to have you guys with us. So I have a unique ask to make as we begin our message today. And so it's real simple. But I'd like for all of us to go ahead and take off our watches right now, literally. Go ahead and take that off and put it in a place where you can't see it. And if you think that's scary, I'm taking mine off too. And that means, time means absolutely nothing. Now, also, by the way, if you have a mobile device called a smartphone or something like that, I'm asking you to go ahead and put that away or actually turn it off. Some of you are saying, Keith, how am I going to follow along? That's where I access the message notes on YouVersion and all that. They're still there. At the end of the service, you'll be able to go back and get them because they're already there. You don't have to fill in any blanks. So go ahead and take your mobile devices, turn those off. You're saying, what in the world are you doing? Well, think about it. If you think that's scary, I really want to let you know that it's not all that scary unless we haven't processed this thing we call time. And I'm simply asking you to trust me with some of your time today, and because I actually believe you're about to have the time of your life, or at least hear about it. That could be a little different, right? But as we continue our series, first, moving from stress to success, and I would submit that many of the things we stress over are time-related in our culture, and we need to really take inventory of that. And at some point during this message, you're going to naturally look to your blank wrist out of habit, trying to figure out what time it is, and at that point you're going to stress out because you're like, oh my gosh, what time is it? And I've lost track of all time, or you're going to stress out over something else. And here's the issue. My point in asking you to do this is to help you realize that there's something that's more important than knowing what time it is. You're saying, what could be more important than knowing what time it is? The thing that's more important than knowing what time it is this: knowing what you're doing with your time. Think about it. Many times throughout the day, we'll check to see what time it is, but not nearly frequently enough do we take the time to evaluate what we're doing with our time. And so that's what we're going to spend a few moments today doing. We already mentioned we're in this series, called First, and talking about putting first things first. And the truth is, as we all know, we have time for what we do first, prioritization, all of those different details. But a text that we want to lean back into today that we actually referenced the first week of the series comes from Paul's letter to the believers at Ephesus. And in Ephesians chapter 5, beginning in verse 15, we have these words, and I'm reading from the Phillips paraphrase, which to me is pretty colorful. Here it is. Live life with a due sense of responsibility, not as those who don't know the meaning and purpose of life, but as those who do. And here's the phrase: make the best use of your time, despite the difficulties of these days. Don't be vague, but firmly grasp what you know to be the will of God. Now, I'm not going to talk about knowing God's will today. We've covered that in the past. We'll probably go there again in the future because it's probably the most frequently asked question people have. But in order to do that, he says we have to take inventory and make the best use of our time. So why should I even take inventory of my time? Why should I seize my time? I'm going to give you 3 quick reasons that we find here in these couple of verses. And the first one is because my time is my life. If you are taking notes, old school way, on your worship guide, you can write that down: because my time is my life. Time is our most precious commodity. It's far more valuable than money. In fact, money, as we know, is a renewable resource. You can get more money, but you can't get more time. Therefore, time is our most precious commodity. Now, I have discovered over the years that people that have a lot of money, it's easy for them to talk about the fact that time is more valuable than money. How many of you know what I'm talking about? Of course, we all can identify with that. But you can always get more money, but you only have a certain allocation of time and that's allotted to you. And so when we waste our time, we're essentially, are you ready for this, wasting our life, because our time is our life. What I do with my time is what I'm doing with my life. Isn't that true? And so the first reason is because my time is my life. The second reason we want to seize the day, carpe diem, if you will, seize the moment, is the fact that the days are evil. A few numbers have such significance in our generation as these, and that is 911. You know, the question that society used to ask is, where were you for a previous generation when JFK was shot? That's not the question that's being asked of today's generation. The question that's asked of today's generation is, where were you at 8:48 a.m. Eastern Standard Time on 911? Where were you at that moment? And that was a moment in time that changed the world for all of us. You're saying, Keith, what's your point? It's twofold. I think that we'd all agree, how many of you would agree, the days are evil? I don't have to reinforce that, try and argue that point. I think we all get it. But my second point is this: you have no control over when you die, or most often, how you die. We can't manage that, but you do have control over how you live. Think about it. You don't have control over how you're going to die, but you and I do have control over how we're going to live, and that leads to the third reason, that we need to seize the day, we need to seize our time, and that's because our days are numbered. Our days are numbered. If you had a bank account and I were to tell you that every morning someone was going to deposit $86,400 in that bank account, and you could spend it any way you wanted to, but at the end of the day, if you didn't use it, it would be removed from your account. How many of you would be motivated to do something strategic with that $86,400 every day? Highly motivated. And yet, that is precisely what's been deposited into the account of our life every day, is 86,400 what? Seconds. Break it down into minutes and then hours, and that's what we have deposited in our account every day. We've already established the fact that we believe that time is a greater and more precious commodity than money, and yet we're more often conscientious about what we do with our money than what we do with our time. And so I think it behooves us to address this. So all I'm trying to say is, the big deal is we have a limited amount of time. In fact, in Psalm 90, verse 12, the psalmist said, teach us to what? Number our days and to recognize how few they are. Help us to spend them as we should. How many of you would agree with me that if you could get control over your time, it would go a long way in you heading in the right direction so that you're where you want to be in the future, and if you had a clear pathway in front of you that you were in control of and somewhat managing by God's leading and direction, that would open the door to less stress and more success. So therefore, the question that we have to ask is, what am I doing with this commodity called time? How am I managing that, and how can I do better with it? Well, let me take the word time as an acrostic. For some of you acrostical friends, I didn't say caustic friends, I said acrostic friends. And let's look at it together. So first thing is, at the T in the word time, we have to take responsibility for our own life. We have to take responsibility for our life. How often have you heard something like this? Well, there's just not enough time in the day. How many of you have ever heard that? None of you have probably voiced that, but you've heard somebody else relatively close by say, well, there's just not enough time in the day. And what we're trying to say is, I just don't have enough time in the day to get everything done that I need to do. And even in making that statement, what are we doing? We're blaming the day. There's not enough time in the day. I'm blaming the day. Or we're blaming the maker, the creator of the day. We're saying to our creator, you just didn't know how to manage this thing called life well enough. You didn't allocate enough time for me today, Lord. We'll never have the time of our life as long as we play that game. See, in Galatians 6:5, it says each person must be responsible for himself. The problem is not time. We're all issued the same amount of time, currency, every day, as we've already referenced. So the problem is not with our time allocation, but rather what we choose to do with our time, what we fill our time with. In other words, what we put first. And here's the deal. There is no such thing as time management. So you've heard that reference. Some of you have gone to courses and taken classes on time management. Listen to me, you can't manage time. Time manages itself. All you can do is manage yourself, and it's in the heart. The heart of time management is management of self. I can't manage time. How many of you would agree with me that clock ticks whether I try and stop it or not? I can't manage time, but I can manage myself and what I do in the context and space of this thing called time. And the truth is where we communicate, we have time for what we do first. Second, I not only take responsibility for myself, but second, I identify what really matters. And we stepped into that a little bit in the first week. I want to revisit it today. Last week I said we have time for what we do first. I said it again today. Reality is, how many of you know we don't have time for everything? How many of you would agree with me on that? Would you agree with me today? We don't have time for everything. Now, how many of you would say, that's true, and that's a little bit disheartening, discouraging? It doesn't have to be, because here's the good news. Do you want some good news? Good news is you don't have to do everything. And let me take it a step further. God doesn't even expect you to do everything. In fact, we are allocated just enough time to do every day what God planned for us to do that day. Why would God, our Creator, create this thing called time and then not give us enough time to do what He put us here to do? He wouldn't. So maybe if I find that I don't have enough time in my day to get done what is on my to-do list, maybe I've taken on some things that God has not asked me to take on. Maybe there's something on Keith Boyer's to-do list. How many of you do a to-do list? I do one every day. I mean, it's right on my phone that it's turned off right now. I don't know what time it is. That's good news for you. Maybe not. But here's the point. I have this thing called a to-do list, and I love checking things off. There's something about accomplishing something that's just very fulfilling and rewarding. And more than that, how many of you, if you do something that wasn't on your list, you put it on the list so you can check one more thing off? I do that. I do that. I don't know what you said, and it doesn't matter. But I do that. And this is why it's imperative that we discover our purpose in life, friends. If we eliminate the wrong things, we'll never fulfill the reason why God put us here in the first place. And equally, we'll never be fulfilled, we'll never be successful, because I would not define success the way most people would define success. I would define success as finding and discovering the will of God and doing it. And if you do that, you're successful. And God's will, like we communicate throughout this series, is not a one-size-fits-all. So God's will for you may be different than God's will for me. And I would say, obviously it is, because God doesn't create all of us to do the exact same thing. But He has a master plan. He says, this is what I'd like to have happen in the world, and I'm going to create this person this way, so they are wired and designed to do this, and this person to do this. And then I think the greatest need in our life beyond salvation is discover why He saved us and created us in the first place. And that's where you're going to be the most fulfilled and satisfied. So as it says in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 23, let's read this verse out loud together. It's up on the screen. What's it say? Everything is permissible, but not everything is beneficial. As followers of Christ, our choices usually aren't good versus evil. Isn't that true? If you are trying and endeavoring to follow God in response to His grace that's invaded your life and live out His purpose for you, you're not struggling with good versus evil. In other words, you don't wake up in the morning and say, you know what should I do today? Should I have a quiet time for the next 30 minutes, or should I go rob a gas station? Not sure, Lord. What do you want me to do? We're not wrestling with that. That's not our struggle. Our struggle is not good versus evil. It's actually good versus better, or better versus best. Some things, listen to me, aren't necessarily wrong. They're just not necessary. How much activity consumes minutes off of our day, or hours, or days off our week that just aren't necessary? I would submit it's highly probable, but there is quite a bit of that. Had to take the time to get that right. So, some things don't just don't have a purpose, or should I say don't fit into God's purpose for you. Therefore, they're not necessary. So selection is the name of the game. See, the USA Today, every day issue of USA Today has more words in it than the entire New Testament. And I know some people who think nothing of sitting down and reading the USA Today or the Wall Street Journal that don't give two thoughts to reading through the entire New Testament. See, that's the good versus great, or better versus best. I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with the USA Today or Wall Street Journal. There's some maybe beneficial information there. But even though everything, as we just read from Corinthians, is permissible, it's not maybe real beneficial. What would benefit someone more? A few pages off of a daily news report, or a few pages off of the Word of God that's living and active, sharper than any two-edged sword, divide between soul and spirit, bone and marrow, judging the thoughts and the intents of the heart, and really gives direction for life. It's a choice thing. And that leads to M. Here it is. And we're going to really actually camp here for a few minutes before our response time. And that is, make sure that you honor God's design. Make sure that you honor God's design. Just over 7 years ago, I was preparing to leave Mwanza, Tanzania, after an incredibly fruitful week with an entire team, partnering with Augustine Mpemba, Bishop Mpemba. And we had an amazing week together. I mean, just like life-changing, not just for those on the receiving end, but for us as well. And we were at the airport in the VIP lounge, because we got passes to go through there, compliments of the bishop. And I was talking with Mpemba, who had coordinated everything, and he did a phenomenal job, he and his team. And he not only looked tired, but he was tired. And I'll never forget that conversation. As we were there at the airport, and I looked him in the eyes, and I could see his weariness, his tiredness. He's worked his tail off. And I looked him right in the eye, and I challenged him, and I said, Bishop, are you taking a Sabbath? And he responded, I said, that's important to get some rest. He goes, oh, my brother, I do not have time for that. You know the Bible says we must work while it's yet day, because night is coming when no man can work. And I said, yeah, that's biblical, but so is the Sabbath. I said, do you believe in tithing? Oh, yes, my brother, I teach our people that all the time. And they honor God. I said, do you honor tithing? Yes, my brother. I said, but what about the Sabbath? He goes, no time for that. I said, you know what? The Sabbath is to your soul what tithing is to your finances. And at that point, because of the teachable man that he is, he said, oh, my brother, I must deal with that. Now, I can laugh along with you, but the sad commentary of that story is, within 2 years of that conversation, I found myself having radically violated the Sabbath principle more than I'd like to admit, that led to some other missteps in my life that were not wise decisions, called workaholism and burnout. And so what I want to share with you for the next few minutes is a part of my own journey because of violating something that God has instituted and implemented into life for our benefit, not for His. I mean, anything God does, He doesn't do for Himself. He doesn't need anything. So everything He offers is for our benefit because He's a whole lot wiser than what we are. And so I referenced this in week 1, but let's develop it a little bit today. When does your day begin? Remember we talked about that, and I said our day doesn't begin when the sun comes up. Our day begins when the sun goes down. And where was my reference? I said, go to the book of Genesis. And some of you are rightfully so want to see it in God's Word. So here it is, Genesis chapter 1, verse 5, 8, 13, 19, 23, and 31. God called the light day, and the darkness He called night. And, are you ready for this? Listen very closely. And there was evening and there was morning the first day. God called the expanse sky, and there was evening and there was morning the second day. The third day, the fourth day, the fifth day, it says that after every part of God's created order, He created something, He said, and there was evening and there was morning the the fourth, fifth, and then the sixth day, it says, God saw all that he had made, and it was very good, and there was evening and there was morning the sixth day. When does your day begin? Listen, friends, I said it the first week. I want to say it again today and drive it home. Your day does not begin when the sun comes up or when you get out of bed. Your day begins when the sun goes down. Your day begins when you go to sleep. Sleep is on the front side of the clock and of our work day. What's the point? God created activity and work to be birthed out of rest, not rest to be birthed out of work. And so that's the created order of God's day. It's evening and morning the first day. Every day is that way. And then he created this thing we call a week. And on the sixth day, he created man. On the seventh day, what did God do? God rested. So God's seventh day was a day of rest. But listen, friends, our first day was a day of rest. We rested before God ever put us to work. What was God saying? I'm going to take care of you so that you are healthy, so that when you go to work, you have strength and energy and vitality. I don't want you to work yourself to a place of exhaustion and then rest. I want you to get rested up, filled up, stored up, and ready to go out and do work from a place of strength, not weakness. Fullness, not lack or emptiness. It's God's created order. And so here's the point, friends. Just as our day begins at sundown and our work is to flow out of rest, so the Sabbath is the first day of the week. And as we honor it, we enter the new week from a position of strength and health as opposed to exhaustion. See, the Sabbath was created by God for us to be a blessing and not a burden. It's where we set aside time for those things that fill our tank. And some would argue, well, Keith, with all that I have on my list and all the things that I have to do, I can't afford to take time off. No, friends, you can't afford not to, because rest is God's idea. It's his plan. Now, it's not just about rest. Let's look at what the text says. Exodus 20, 9 and 10. You have 6 days in which to do your work, but the seventh day is a day of rest dedicated to me. On that day, no one is to work. So when God puts a commandment in the Bible, how many of you know he doesn't do it capriciously? He doesn't do it because he wants to make our life miserable or limit our fun. God is not a killjoy. Can we get that? God provides us with principles for living because he knows what is best for his creation. Therefore, honoring his instruction and obeying his commands is what makes life better and moves us from stress to success. So again, in Exodus 34:21, 6 days you shall labor, but on the seventh day you shall rest. Even during the plowing season and harvest, you must rest. So, see, for me, this language makes sense. I grew up on a farm. We work 7 days a week, and that's part of my dilemma, and we often communicate, a strength push extreme becomes a weakness. I understand hard work. I got a work ethic. That was instilled in me from the time I was a little boy. I get all that, but biblically saying even during the harvest season, you need to take a break. And we did that to my dad's credit. We actually, during the harvest, he was a principled man. He said, no, we're not going to harvest the crops in the midst of the season. We're going to take Sundays off, and we did, other than the essential work that I won't get into right now. So you're saying, well, Keith, then when should you take your Sabbath? You know what? Jesus said it really didn't matter. Remember, the Sabbath wasn't created to somehow force and impose something on our lives that is going to make it more difficult. It's actually given as a gift to make life better. In fact, let me read to you something. And so in the Hebrew language, the Sabbath, the word for that is Shabbat. Everybody say Shabbat. And so that's what it is. And in Mark chapter 2, verse 27, in the New Living Translation, it says this: the Sabbath was made to meet the needs of the people, not the people to meet the requirements of the Sabbath. So in our life group, which is just an amazing, powerful life group with prayer as the focus, and one of the people in our group just shared this last week about their experience. A week ago, they had an opportunity to go see some friends in Texas, and while they were with them, they are Messianic Jews. In other words, they're believers that Jesus is the Messiah, but they still practice aspects or expressions of the core of their Jewish faith, which is massive, that they honor the Sabbath, the Shabbat. And so I said, that's awesome. Would you just email me some of your experience from that? And here's what was submitted. I just got back from a trip to Texas to be with some good friends of mine. They are Christian Jews. I was there for a long weekend, so I got in on their Shabbat, their Sabbath. On Friday, we went to dinner early and then went to the grocery store to get provisions for the next day, things for breakfast, lunch, and snacks, etc. And this was all done before sundown. And she then reiterated what I communicated. The Jews' day begins at sundown, which means their day begins with rest, which is counter to our Western culture where our day ends with rest. On Friday evening after sundown, we started the day with lighting the Shabbat candles and sharing communion. On Saturday, the five of us ate a simple breakfast, and then we got into our worship experience, went into the living room, and started the single most refreshing day I've ever experienced in my life. I'm talking about having the time of your life, friends. We worshiped together to songs on our phones. Then we started to pray for each other one by one in a concentrated fashion, asking God to show us how to pray for the individual friend. We spent 1 hour on each person, and it was truly an incredibly anointed time. No busy Saturday agenda, no stressing, no striving. The day was spent hanging out with each other, laughing and talking and hearing each other's hearts. Midday, we ate a pre-prepared lunch, and then at sundown, Shabbat ended, and we left to go out for dinner. I felt as refreshed as I've ever felt at the end of a day. Shabbat had calmed me, rejuvenated me, and blessed me beyond my ability to describe. Shabbat. So when? Doesn't matter. I mean, think about it. For me, today's work day. The church we used to give leadership to, we had Saturday night services and Sunday mornings. So Saturday was a work day. And it's not about law, it's about grace. It's about when does it fit in your schedule. And here's where I want to go. So what are you supposed to do on your Sabbath? Well, how many of you know what we usually do is play catch up on all the work that we didn't get done the rest of the days. And then we have these things called a honey-do list. Are any of you familiar with that? We end up cramming all this stuff into our day off, and as a result, we're still working. We're not taking a Shabbat, a Sabbath. Now, let's break it out. So what do? Well, obviously, I'm to rest my body. I'm to rest my body. We're not wired to go 24/7, 365. We all know that's true. Our bodies and brains aren't built for that. How many of you have discovered that if you don't take time off, your body will tell you that you're going to take time off? In fact, during the French Revolution, true story, you can Google it, but you can't right now because you put your smartphones away. They actually outlawed Sunday as a day of rest during the French Revolution, and they wanted people to work every day because they were at war. It was, quote, harvest time. A few years later, they were forced to reinstate it because the health of the nation had totally collapsed and deteriorated. See, biblical principles work whether you're a believer or not. And when they're violated, there will be the consequences of it, whether personally or nationally. And so one man challenged another to an all-day wood chopping contest. How many of you wondered, why in the world did Keith bring his axe to church today? That's scary, isn't it? Some of you are watching right now on video saying, what is the dude going to do? We're taking heads. No, not really, but the challenge was this. One woodcutter challenged another, and in the context of that challenge, the competition was whoever could chop the most wood throughout the day was going to win some significant prize and gift. And so as they went to work, the other man just started chopping away, and he worked his tail off, and he didn't stop, and the other guy just leisurely took a lunch break, and then after he just sat down, took a lunch break, he came back at it and was chopping away and going after it pretty strong. And at the end of the day, the challenger was surprised and annoyed to see that the other guy had actually chopped more wood than he had. And so they sat down, and of course the award was given out, and he sat down, they had a conversation. He said, I don't get it. He said, I kept looking over, and you were chopping wood, but then there was a while you took this break, and you weren't chopping any wood, and yet you still chopped more wood than I did by the end of the day. And he says, he said, what you don't realize is that when I sat down to take a break, I was actually sharpening my axe. What's the point? Your Shabbat is when you sharpen your axe. What's your axe? Your axe is your soul. It's the essence of your existence. Because as we communicated earlier in the series, as goes your soul, so goes your life. In fact, John prayed in one of his little letters for his friend Gaius, and he said this. What did he say? I pray that you may prosper and be in health as your soul prospers. What was he praying for? He said, as goes your soul, so goes your life. Take care of your soul. So here's my point. The Sabbath isn't just a day of physical rest, but it's a day of spiritual worship and engagement. That somehow, can I just be bold and blunt and to the point, is being lost in our culture today. And I believe it's the enemy that's squeezing it out, where there are people that are even believers saying, I don't need that corporate worship thing. I can watch online. I'm not saying you can't. You can listen to podcasts. You can do all that stuff. But there's something different about listening to a podcast and taking in a message or putting on a worship CD in your own space and place, and the corporate coming together of God's people for celebration and worship. They are not one and the same, friends. And Hebrews, even New Testament, he said, don't forsake the assembling together as some are in the habit of doing. How many of you know we all have habits? We are all a mixed bag of habits. Now, most of us, we hear the word habit, we think of something maybe not so favorable, like negative. I'm here to say that habits are neutral. It's what are they? We all have them. How many of you have a favorable habit called bathing? Brushing your teeth. Hallelujah. It's a habit. And they say, research says that it takes somewhere, most say it takes 21 days to develop a new habit. The more aggressive and thorough research says it's not actually accurate. It's closer to 90 days. But after 90 days, something becomes so much a part of you that it's just built into the fabric of your life, and you just never step away from it. And we have those. I was joking, but I was serious. Brushing your teeth, bathing, showering, cleaning, whatever it is, those are built in, and we automatically get up, we do those things. What if we built in and hardwired into our life the very things that are going to take care of our soul, not just our bodies? And that's what Jesus gifts us with in this beautiful thing. And so the second thing I do, I not only rest my body, I refocus my spirit. I get a spiritual tune-up. There's a word for that in the Bible, and the word is worship. This is where are you ready? As I just said 3 minutes ago, it's where we sharpen our axe. It's where we sharpen our soul. The primary objective of the Sabbath, friends, is not, listen to me, the primary objective of the Sabbath is not just to rest from your work, but rest for worship. See, one of the benefits of worship is it helps me get a better perspective on life and its challenges. In other words, you have a problem and it can seem overwhelming, and you're like, I don't know what to do with this, and you're saying, I don't know how I'm going to manage this part of my life, and I'm just overwhelmed by it. And then you step into this space and place called corporate worship, and all of a sudden the worship team steps up to the plate and begins to sing songs about the greatness of God, and you begin to say things that you're currently not feeling. And some would say, well, I don't want to be hypocritical, so I'm not going to sing or say something that I don't feel, because that's not being authentic. No, that is being authentic to your faith, because we live by faith and not by sight. We walk by the Word of God and not by our feelings. And so all of a sudden, as I step out in faith and I begin to declare the greatness of God, I declare the Word of God over my circumstance, over my situation, my feelings begin to align with God's truth, God's reality, God's person, and His position and perspective on my problem. And then I get His perspective, and when I get His perspective, it brings everything into perspective, and all of a sudden that thing that seemed like a mountain, now that I'm on the mountain, becomes a molehill. Come on, somebody. That's the purpose of worship. Let's stand and worship our great God together.